We'll get started right away because I know we want to have as much time as possible to spend with Chip. I'm Tammy. I work with New Mexico New. And on behalf of our founder, Paula Getz, who normally would be here, she had another appointment that she had to attend to this morning, but she'll be joining us shortly. But on her behalf and mine, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for coming today. We're really excited to present today's online learning event. I'm as anxious to hear what Chip has to say about midlife transitions as I'm sure all of you are. So we'll get to that really quickly. I want to first just briefly introduce New Mexico New. It's an acronym for New Elder World. Our intention is to help co-create a world where elders here in New Mexico are regarded for their wisdom, their life experience, their knowledge, and recognized as the asset that they are to our community and the economic ecosystem. We're also on a mission to proactively engage new elders. And when I say new elders, we're referring to people that are new to the 50 plus club, if you will, and inspired, of course, by Chip's use of modern elder and what that really means in today's world. We do that by offering these types of online learning events like today, and we're building our community. So we invite New Mexicans to join us in building that community. We'll be offering other types of programs down the road, so stay tuned. You can visit our website at nm-new.org if you would like to sign up and join us. I also want to just quickly mention that the reason these programs are made available free of charge is because we have some wonderful, very generous sponsors. Those include AARP New Mexico, Cumulus Media, French Funerals, New Senda Credit Union, Presbyterian Healthcare Services, and Albuquerque Senior Affairs. So thank you so much to all those organizations for sponsoring this event today. We're also joined today by teen years. Two teen years are with us, Jillian and Emily. Teen years are tech-savvy teens who empower seniors. And so they're driving our Zoom meeting today and here if you have any technical issues. So Emily will be the person helping with any technical issues. And Ellen Raganini is monitoring our chat. So if you have any questions on chat, Ellen is our project manager with New Mexico New. She will answer your questions. I would like to encourage everybody to turn your camera on because it helps us to create a sense of community. Certainly we understand if you have a bandwidth issue and can't do that. However, it also helps when someone is talking and speaking, and as Chip's going to do, have a conversation to engage with the audience. So if you guys could do that, we would appreciate it. So it is my honor and pleasure to get to introduce Chip Conley. I've had the privilege of getting to know him a little bit over the past few weeks. And I'm so inspired, Chip, by your vision for developing regenerative communities here in New Mexico, and especially excited that you're planning to expand Modern Elder Academy to New Mexico. And just a quick introduction for others, Chip is a rebel hospitality entrepreneur. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He loves to disrupt industries, as I'm sure many of you are already aware. He was the founder of Joie de Vivre, a boutique hotel chain in California. Then he went on to work with Airbnb, which, as I understand it, inspired him to eventually create Modern Elder Academy. So Chip, thank you so much for being here today. Really excited to hear what you are going to guide us through this conversation around navigating midlife transitions. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to you. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you, Tammy. And it's great to see a few of you who were at either one of the events we had, was it last week, I guess, in either Albuquerque or in Santa Fe. Let me give you a sense of what we're going to do here today. I'm going to give you a little bit of my story, how I got introduced to the idea of what it means to navigate midlife transitions, how that led to the founding of Modern Elder Academy, as well as my last book, which was called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. Then we'll dive into a discussion of what is the transition, what kinds of transitions happen often in midlife. We'll talk about the stages of transition. Very few of us have, quite honestly, been educated in what does it mean to go through a transition and how do you do that well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to try to give us enough time for some substantive Q&A. And when we get to that point, you can either raise your hand using the function on Zoom, or you can just do it, visually, and I'll call on people. Additionally, our team's going to be keeping a track of chat. So if you have questions that you want to put in chat, that's fine. But we will keep the questions till the end, as opposed to throughout the time. Sound good? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay. Well, let's start with my story, which is I went through a very difficult time, just like many of you. We all, you get into adulthood and you hit your 40s. In my case, doesn't have to be your 40s, although there is social science research that shows at this point pretty conclusively that the 40s may be the toughest adult decade. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe in the Q&A, we can go into some of the reasons for that. But I hit a major slide in my life, a downslide between about 45 and 49. And that's actually sort of, it actually jives with what the social science research shows on the U curve of happiness, where actually people, after hitting a low in their 40s, usually their late 40s, are generally happier in their 50s than their 40s, happier in their 60s than their 50s, and happier in their 70s than 60s, which is fascinating because in many ways, the societal narrative around aging is, oh, it gets worse. But in fact, happiness and life contentment actually gets better after hitting a low point. So why was I hitting my low point? Without dragging you through all of my conversations with coaches and therapists and best friends, what I'll say is that I went through a lot. I guess, I had a long-term relationship ending. I had an African-American foster son who was an adult who was being wrongfully accused of a crime, predominantly because of a race issue. And I was doing my best to try to keep him out of prison. I had two friends and ultimately 5 friends take their own lives. So death by suicide around this time. This was the Great Recession. This was 2008 when all this was happening. And during the Great Recession, I had a company, that Joie de Vivre, that Tammy mentioned, and hotels get just creamed in a recession. And so I could see we were going to be running out of cash. And I, frankly, after 22 years of running that company, I didn't want to do it anymore. But I felt exceptionally obligated to I couldn't quit my job, so to speak. And then I had a flatline experience. Amidst all of that, I broke my ankle playing baseball and had a cut on my leg that led to a bacterial condition in my leg, a septic leg. And I was put on an antibiotic that didn't work very well. And so I was put on a stronger antibiotic. And that with a stronger antibiotic, I was allergic, and we didn't know that. And so after giving a speech on stage on crutches, I was sitting, thankfully, and signing books, and I went unconscious. And then when the paramedics showed up, I started 9 times going flatline. Basically, I'd never heard of the word asystolic, which basically means you have no heart rate. And the only reason I heard that was because when I came back from having no heart rate, they were saying asystolic, because frankly, when you have no heart rate, you don't hear much. That's another Q&A question you could ask about, like, what's it like to have an NDE, a near-death experience? So all of that happened around the same time. And I have to tell you that at age 47, I did have friends. My best friend was a coach. Was I in therapy? Yeah, I did a little bit of therapy at that time. But I guess what I felt more than anything was that I was getting the game of life wrong. Many of us grew up playing that board game, the game of life, and it was sort of just a linear path. And it was very American successism, sort of like, okay, you get married, you get some, little tokens for your car as you're driving on this board game. I just felt like I had driven off the board game. I'd fallen off the board game. I was like feeling so inadequate in how I was operating my life that I felt like I was, not only was all this happening, but I felt like I was sort of an idiot because I didn't know how to address it all. Long story short, as I got through it, it was in particular, the 2 years after that flatline experience in the summer of 2008 was exceptionally difficult, but I got through it. And I noted to myself as I got through it, you know what? I wish there was, yes, there's self-help books on midlife and how do you get through midlife, but no one had really told me about the life stages that happen starting in one's 40s and beyond. And I'm now turning 61 next month. So I've been since then quite fascinated by that. So ultimately, what happened a couple of years after I ended up selling my company at the bottom of the recession, is I was asked to join the 3 young founders of Airbnb to help take their little startup, their little tech startup, and turn it into a hospitality brand globally. And so I spent 4 years there full time, and then 5 years now as an advisor. And the fact is that they brought me in to help be the mentor to the CEO, who was 21 years younger than me, and I was going to report to him, which was an interesting feeling. And soon after that, they started calling me the modern elder at age 52. And I wasn't sure I liked that at first. It's like, what's a modern elder? And they said, well, you're as curious as you are wise. And the curiosity is what really actually allows you to operate here in a tech company, having never worked in a tech company before. So long story short is that experience of joining a company, having so little experience in tech, but having some really good leadership experience, I understood the hospitality and travel business pretty well. It allowed me to actually offer something to them and not feel irrelevant. And that's ultimately when I started writing my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, led me to creating the Modern Elder Academy, the world's first midlife wisdom school, dedicated to helping people with long life learning, not just lifelong learning, but long life learning we define as creating a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long. Because, other than the last 5 years in the United States, we've seen a continuous growth in longevity. And pre-COVID, the US was already flatlining on its longevity and even going down a little bit because of more death by despair, which is another sign that, we societally need to understand our life stages better, because a lot of that death by despair is people in midlife. Let me define midlife for a moment, and then I'm going to ask you a question for you to put in the chat. So midlife, I used to define it pretty clearly. It was like, okay, I think it's 45 to 65, because that's what I learned in a sociology class a long time ago. But more and more sociologists now consider midlife to be 35 to 75, which is a really long time. I call it the midlife marathon. And it starts earlier because in some industries, for people who are working, they feel irrelevant earlier. If you're in the advertising industry, or you're a software engineer, or you're in any industry, retail, where it feels like technology has taken over. And then there's people who are going to work way past the traditional retirement age of 62 or 65, and they're going to work till they're 75 or 80, or they're going to work for the rest of their lives because they love it. So midlife has become, something that has elongated from maybe 20 years to 40 years. And it's really a stage of life issue. I mean, I'm here in the Galisteo Basin, where our ranch is, our MEA ranches, where we'll be opening in 2023. We had a group of alums here last week, and we had one alum who is clearly in midlife, and he's turning 80 next year. And he's so in midlife because he is full on in his career, 100%, he's not cut back. He's in great shape. He loves his life. So he considers himself still in midlife. Before I ask this chat question, let me just give you a stat that I think is very important for people to know. And some of you heard it when I gave it last week. And that is that when you shift your mindset on aging from a neutral or negative perspective to a positive perspective on aging, you add 7.4 years to your life. Now, this comes from research from Becca Levy, a professor and very well-known academic at Yale University, based upon a series of studies she did. And what's fascinating about that is that the additional life, and of course, happy life, because if you actually have a positive perspective on aging, you're going to be generally happier than if you have a negative perspective. That additional life, 7.4 years of life, is more life than a person would receive if they actually quit smoking or started exercising in midlife. So it's a huge public health opportunity. So, but one of the problems we have as a society is we don't really acknowledge how many transitions we're going through in midlife. It's almost like, okay, yes, the adolescents go through a lot of transitions in adolescence, and we give them a lot of space for that because, they're going through hormonal and emotional and physical changes and maybe identity changes of how they see themselves. But guess what? You're going through those kinds of transitions, emotional, hormonal, physical, and identity transitions in midlife as well. And there's a sociologists now consider midolescence to be the adult corollary to adolescence. So adulthood is like there's these bookcases, or the what do you call it when you you have books and you have something on the side of the books to hold them up. Bookends. Thank you, Tammy. So the bookends of adulthood is adolescence at the start of your adulthood and midolescence at the end of your adulthood as you're moving into elderhood. So the question is, wow, if midolescence is this not just the end of traditional adulthood, but it's the initiation of elderhood, how do we help people with that initiation, especially through all the transitions they're going through? So here's the chat question. I want you to, I'll ask the question and then put something in the chat if you can. What kind of transitions are you going through right now in your own life? Are you, a recent empty nester? Did you recently retire? Did you go through menopause? Or men, you don't know it, but you go through andropause, which is the male version of menopause. Write in the chat what kinds of transitions you have been going through, like let's say in the last couple of years, and let's see what comes in. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat so far. So we're going to need, oh, here we go. So corporate, we have a few of them here. Corporate career to business owner and aging parents, fear of retirement, moving away from mostly full-time to working semi-retirement, recent empty nester, return to working full-time, 75 and working harder than ever for a great cause, menopause, left traditional job, changing relationship dynamics, aging parent with dementia. Lots of aging parents here on this list. Yeah, one of the things that's so interesting, thank you for everybody continuing to put those in. We talk about the sandwich generation. If for those of you who haven't heard of it, sandwich generation is the person who is taking care of aging parents. They're the caregiver there, and they may even have kids as well, whether they're kids who are not adults yet, or sometimes millennials who are just needing your help, need to move back in at home. And what a stressful situation that is when you actually are trying to take care, becoming a caregiver on both sides. And many of you know that. I think it's part of the reason why we really need to look at the infrastructure, the societal infrastructure in the United States, about how are we supporting that. And I think it's actually part of the reason for the Great Resignation, why many people aren't going back to work, because they're actually not just dealing with COVID issues, but they're dealing with the caretaking issues of both elderly parents as well as their children. So thank you for all of those introductions to what you're going through. So let's talk about transitions for a moment and the difference between change and transition. Now, I got to tell you that until about 4 years ago, I had never thought of change and transition being two different things. But I've come to realize, having read a book by William Bridges, beautiful book, sort of a seminal book on transitions, from maybe 40 or 50 years ago. And he was able to show that change is circumstantial and situational. So change often happens when you're just changing your circumstances. But transition happens when you actually, what you're moving into is something that's almost spiritual or psychological. So change is circumstantial and situational. Transition is psychological and spiritual. What does that mean? It means that if you change your spouse or your boss, but you haven't done maybe the internal work to understand why you didn't like your past boss or your past spouse, you may replace them with someone who looks a lot like your past spouse or boss. You change the circumstances, but you actually don't necessarily change your relationship with the circumstances. And that's a big fundamental shift in midlife, is starting to actually see your patterns, being willing to actually understand, okay, I need to do some deeper work. So many of you know Richard Rohr because he, obviously lives in Albuquerque or south of Albuquerque, the Center for Action and Contemplation. Well, both Richard Rohr, the Franciscan friar, as well as the famous psychologist Carl Jung, both have said the same thing. What they've said is that the first half of our lives, what we're doing is building the container for our lives. And that container is really the ego. It's how do we create the container of who we are? What differentiates us? How do we feel about ourselves, etc. And it's the second half of our life that we fill the container. And that's when we move from the operating system being primarily our ego to the operating system being primarily our soul. Now, your mileage may vary. There's lots of very soulful people in their 20s and at any age. But the process that tends to happen in midlife is a process that either circumstances in your life, as was true for me when I was having all that bad stuff happen to me, it woke me up to saying the way I have done things in the past may not work for the future. Or you may have just had that, it wasn't circumstances, it was your own just internal sense that something's waking up inside of you. And often what the waking up is something around, I don't have to live by the script of someone else. Many of us were given a script by our parents or our community. And we, whether the success was about money or success or romance or relationships, and we did our best to try to live up to that. Maybe we became the crazy hippie in our teens or 20s. And we went and we created our own script. Beautiful. But then we got stuck on this other script that might have been in reaction to that first script. And it's around midlife that we start to get more comfortable in our own skin, just as it starts to sag. And we get used to the idea that no one's going to write the script for us. It's time to become our own screenwriter. And it's often in the transitions of our life that we get to see face to face how we can change our habits. So let's talk about transitions, the anatomy of a transition. So one of the things I also didn't know 4 years ago when I started doing this work on MEA and really tapping into the academic community and a lot of our guest faculty members was that there's really 3 stages of any transition. And William Bridges talks about this in his book, Transitions. Bruce Feiler wrote a book last summer. It became a New York Times bestseller called Life is in the Transitions. Bruce is on our MEA online faculty. I'll talk about MEA online a little bit later. And he's on the faculty, and if you did MEA online, he's actually one of the teachers you learn from. Both of them said the same thing, which is that there's really 3 stages to any transition. And once you sort of understand the anatomy of the transition or the life cycle of a transition, it helps a lot to understand what can you do along the way. So what are the 3 stages of a transition? Well, let's use some biology we learned from elementary school for a moment. to help us with this. Remember the caterpillar to butterfly journey. There were 3 stages. The first stage is the caterpillar is going out and bulking up, eating. And then one day, the caterpillar realizes it's the end of an era. I wish I was a caterpillar psychologist to understand what was going through the caterpillar's mind, to know that this first stage was coming to an end and the second stage was about to begin. And the second stage was the cocoon or the chrysalis, when the caterpillar chooses to go into a dark and gooey place so that it can move to the third stage, which is becoming a butterfly. So there are 3 stages I just outlined there. The ending of something, the messy middle, when you're liminal. To be liminal means to be in a state of in-between, something in between. Liminality is part of transition. It's part of life. But often when we're liminal, like I felt when I was 47, I feel like I'm like awkward and getting it wrong. When you're liminal as an adolescent, you just know that you're awkward and you're an adolescent. But when you're awkward in midolescence or in midlife or in later midlife, it doesn't feel good, because you sort of feel like you're an adult and you're supposed to know it all. Well, of course, you're not going to know it all. And part of what we try to help people to do at MEA is to help understand, how can we learn from each other? And how can wisdom not be taught, but be shared based upon sharing life experience? So it's that middle section, when you're in the messy middle, that you need to be willing to say, I'm no longer a caterpillar. I'm in this dark and gooey place. I'm not going to go back and try to go back to where I was. And you then have to ask yourself, what are the things you can do to make it better? There's a lot of things you can do during that period to make it better. Certainly, being socially involved, but also creating ritual in your life. Being able to say, that's the end of that. I have a friend, Mariana, and I write about her in my book, Wisdom at Work. She was a graphic designer, had her own studio, had a number of employees, but also had contractors. At some point, she just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to have my own graphic design studio and have everybody on, payroll. And so after 20 years of doing this, she decided to finish it. But she also knew that she had all these clients who didn't want her to finish it. So she felt like she had to do a ritual to end that first step, that first stage. And so she invited clients, employees, contractors, and friends to a local cemetery. And they actually went through a ritual of saying, obviously they didn't bury anything, but they were given the ability to go there by the people running the cemetery, to actually have about 30 people there to talk about the end of the era of her company. Now, it was a moment we do that. We're pretty good as a society about creating rituals that help people through transitions. But generally, we do that at the start of life and at the end of life. We do it, you have a baptism, or you might have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, a quinceañera. You have a commencement ceremony when you're graduating from high school, going into college, you're commencing your adulthood. You're going to get married, you have a wedding, you're pregnant, you have a baby shower, you die, you have a funeral. But between baby shower and funeral, there's not a lot of rituals. So helping people to see how to introduce a little ritual into your life, to know that you're ending something, helps you accelerate your process through that cocoon stage. There's a bunch of other things I could talk about, but I can actually let that wait till Q&A. And just know that our MEA online program goes into so much more depth in an 8-week course on this. The third step is actually recognizing that something new has happened. You have accelerated your process through the messy middle. And it's time to actually start owning the fact that you're a butterfly, to use that metaphor, or whatever it is that you're doing. And that period is important because you actually have to be moving forward while still imagining what you can learn from the past. So these are the 3 stages of transition. And one of the real values of helping people to understand the roadmap of a transition is helping them to understand which stage they're in of the 3 stages of transition. because often the messy middle piece feels like it's forever. But I have seen so many people, including myself, say they're in the messy middle, but they keep going back to the old identity or the old mindset or the old, relationship that no longer works, that they moved on from, that they keep going back there because there's comfort there. So let me see, I'm just gonna move for the next about 5 or 10 minutes to talk about 6 different kinds of transition that I'll take you through. And then we'll start to wrap up and we'll open it up for questions. So if I were to look at, the kind of transitions, or you looked at the kind of transitions, I'm going to open up a document here for myself, that would actually help you to understand what kind of transitions you're going through. There are 6 categories of transitions that we've studied. And I'm going to actually take you through each one of them. There's not a different approach to each one of these, other than if you can understand where most of the transition energy needs to go, there are paths that can help you on that. So let me start with personal transitions. So there's 6 P's. Each one starts with a P. So personal transitions some of these are very obvious. It relates to your marriage or your relationship that you have as a primary partner in life. It could be your relationship with your family in some way, your broader family, becoming an empty nester, etc. It could relate to taking care of your parents. It could be feeling somehow wronged or violated in some way, and feeling the emotional challenges around that. It could be someone in your family passing away. And it also could be a personal transition, could be choosing to downsize, choosing to, live in a different place. And so often when you look at some of the, there's sometimes these online quizzes that allow you to see, how much stress you're under. And you look at what are the top 20 stressors in people's lives? Well, we're going to look at 6 transitions here, but this is the one, when they're looking at the top 20, about 10 or 12 of the top 20 often are in this category. So recognize that personal transitions are an important part of it. And often they relate to not just to you, but to your relationship with other people. Okay, the second one is physical transitions. Now, this is very personal. Physical transitions are often not related so much to other people. They're more related just to your own body and your own sense of physical and even to some degree, sort of this, even the spiritual self. So that could be your relationship with yourself when it comes to aging. It could be a health diagnosis. It could be related to your relationship with your sexuality, or your, again, menopause or andropause. It could relate to your diet and how healthy you feel. It could relate to actual practices, exercise, mindfulness practices, things like that are working or not. And it also could feel like there could be an element with physical transitions where you feel stuck. You can just feel the stuckness in your body. And the stuckness may be, COVID related, in terms of just feeling like you're stuck at home. Now, the third kind of transitions are psychological transitions. And let me start by saying, these are all like a Venn diagram. There's 6 different categories, but there's a lot of overlap in these categories. So all I'm doing right now is to try to help you to see that there are lots of kinds of transitions out there. Psychological transitions often relate to how your sense of self-esteem, your sense of how you see yourself. For people in midlife and later, it can sometimes feel you're feeling the ageism of society in yourself, and your own ageism, maybe your anxiety or depression or your sense of irrelevancy. Psychological transitions could be your capacity to shift your mindset when you feel stuck and fixed in a mindset and you can't change it. It could relate to your ability to roll with the punches, so to speak, as opposed to be reactive. It could actually relate to your mental health and the quality of your mental acuity. And ultimately, it has a lot to do with how you're feeling in the world and how you're feeling, whether you feel the world is a scary place or a friendly place. So there's a lot there. So that's the third category. The fourth category is about maybe the most obvious of the 6 categories. It's professional transitions, changing your career, changing your calling, so to speak, changing your job or where you're living and where you're working, moving to a state of retirement or semi-retirement, starting a new business, anything related to your relationship with money is often in this category. And yeah, that's about it. So that one's more obvious, and it clearly, these are stressors. Our relationship with our job, if we're working, often it has a huge impact on our psychological sense of self-esteem. And certainly finances are one of the top stressors people have. Okay, the 5th category is purpose. So purpose transitions often relate to things that are not as tangible as professional transitions. So a purpose transition could be, I feel like I'm in the midst of some internal change that I can't explain. Now that could be psychological, but when it's an internal change that feels like why I'm here on earth and what I'm supposed to be doing, it could be a sense of purpose. Often a purpose transition sometimes relates to your relationship with spirituality or religion or your values. It may have something to do with your sense of legacy or your sense of being relevant in the world. So purpose is the number one piece of advice I give to people when I hear all the time people saying, I feel like I'm missing my purpose. And I sometimes feel like we as a society are so purpose focused that we scare people into thinking, I don't have a purpose. And what I suggest to people is rather than getting fixated about not having a purpose, focus on something that will make you purposeful. Because purposeful is the verb, the way of taking action. And if you could actually ask yourself, if you don't have the purpose like your friend does, and you're comparing, instead of comparing money with your friend, you're comparing purpose with your friend, forget about the comparing. Instead, focus on what is it in your life that would make you feel more purposeful, and you will find the breadcrumbs maybe to your purpose that way. Dr. Phil Pizzo at Stanford has proven that the 3 things people need more than anything else in age 50 and beyond are purpose, wellness, and community. So purpose is important. And often when people retire and make the transition out of the workforce, they lose all 3. Why do you lose all 3? Because of retiring. Number one is not for all of us, but for many of us, our purpose is defined by the work we do. It might be by the activism we do or the volunteer work. Beautiful. But for many people, it's the actual work they do. So if you retire, that you better try to find something else to replace that purpose. Secondly, community. I'll do community second. That's pretty obvious. If you're in the workforce in a company or working as an independent person for other people in relationship, maybe as a consultant or something, you're in contact with lots of other people out there. And so when you are no longer working, you need to build community. And it's actually been a huge part of what we've seen at MEA. And then thirdly is this idea of wellness. And that's the big surprise to me. Like you think, okay, I'm retiring, I have more time in my life, and therefore, yes, I understand the purpose and community, but I feel like I should have more time to be healthy and well and focus on my nutrition and exercising and all that. But in fact, quite the opposite happens. And when people don't have the structure from their work, they actually spend more time watching TV. The average retired person in the United States watches 47 hours of TV a week. That's crazy. So purpose is important, but so is community and wellness. And then finally, the 6th P, and then we will, I'll talk about a couple more things and then we'll open up for Q&A. The 6th P could be defined as either pandemic or passing, something that's passing, someone that's passing. So what is related to the sixth P? It relates to when things outside of your control, things that you can't, things that are uncertain, overwhelm you. The transition could have psychological effect, could have a physical effect. So it relates almost to all of these, but it's been particularly noticeable in the pandemic because the uncertainty around social health and the public health has been so, we've been learning along the way. It also relates in non-pandemic times also to just death, our relationship with death, our relationship with surprises and catastrophes. And often it relates to the feelings we have when we're not in control. So these are the 6 categories of transitions. You may come up with others, and you're welcome to come up with those that don't start with P. But the key that we have learned over time is when you can help people to first understand what they're going through, which stage they're in, number 1, stage 1, 2, or 3. What are the key things that are challenging them during the transition? And then looking at how do you develop a process for actually using rituals, using social support from other people, using a shift in mindset. These are all the kinds of things we help people with and teach them, and helping them create the new habits that will support your transition to move through it more quickly. This is what we call TQ, transitional intelligence. And it's a phenomenally important skill that people need to have in the modern times, because the fact is there are 3 things happening all at the same time. We are living longer on average, again, the last 5 years in the US, less so. In many industries, power is moving younger and the world is changing faster. And that world is changing faster piece, we can't do anything about. Things are happening much more quickly, which means that for many of us, being able to adapt to what's going on, not just being resilient. There's a lot of people out there who talk about resilience as the solution. Resilience is white knuckling it. Resilience buys you time. Adaptability buys you a future. And learning how to become adaptable and have an openness to new experiences is that, and curiosity are the 2 greatest variables for why people live longer and happier lives. Yes, there's other things, there's community, there's food, etc. But in terms of your own personal life, learning how to be more curious and learning how to be open to new experiences have huge impacts on later life longevity as well as happiness. So last thought before I open it up for Q&A. For those who want to learn more about all of this, you can go to the Modern Elder Academy website, modernelderacademy.com. You can learn about the 3 different kinds of programs we have. We will soon, 2 years from now, have programs in Santa Fe or in the Galisteo Basin, and then hopefully in the city of Santa Fe as well. But for right now, we have programs, workshops in Baja, in Mexico, and it's a beautiful place. You'll, I think, enjoy it if you want to come. We also have something called sabbatical sessions there, which is lighter programming. But for most of you, you're not going to want to jump on a plane and you don't want to spend a lot of money. And so our Modern Elder Academy online, MEA online program may be right for you. And that's our next program starts October 2nd. And if you go to the website, you just click on the MEA online tile on the homepage and you can learn more about it. So Tammy, I'm going to open it up for questions. Sound good?
That's great. Thank you so much, Chip. It's a lot to think about, midlife transitions. No doubt I can speak personally that as a modern elder, I'm experiencing many of those myself. So it's a timely topic. So anyone that has questions, please feel free to raise your hand and Jillian can call on you, or if you would feel more comfortable writing your question in chat, you're welcome to do that. If you want to keep it private, you can send it to either me or Chip, and we can see those messages so that it's not shared. So we want everybody to feel like they can be seen and heard.
Just
So
and
go
a
ahead.
little zoom instruction here. If you go down to the bottom of your screen there, you'll see reactions as well. And under reactions, if you click on that, you'll see right above it says raise hand. And so let's see. Chip just raised his hand. Look at that. And if you do that, it takes you to the upper left-hand corner so I can see you more easily. Now let's see how I lower hand. I just go straight back and I just lowered my hand. Oh, you just learned something new. If some of you did. So feel free to do that as well. That I will not be able to see chat as much because I'll be spending most of my time just listening and trying to respond. So any questions? And you're welcome to, if you have questions, make sure it's moderately short. If you disagree with me on something and you want to actually debate, I'm okay with that too. Just keep it short so we can have a little debate. That's fine. Because I'm not a know-it-all. I'm still learning. So you may be able to teach me something. Who would like to be the guinea pig and the first one to ask the question? Other than Paula, because Paula's here now. And at any moment, Paula will raise her hand and ask a question. But let's see who else.
I think Bob Feinberg has a question.
All right, Bob. Hey, how you
Hi,
doing?
Chip. Thank you so much for this. It's very enlightening. So you love what you do. I'm at the upper age level of 70. And my quote is, I haven't worked a day yet in my life. So I'm loving what I'm doing. But I guess the first quick part of the question is, when do you know it's time to retire? And I guess the first answer to that, I'll answer it myself, is when you're not being effective or you're not enjoying what you're doing.
There you go.
But secondly, when you're in this transitional age period, how do you find out because I enjoy every day of my life, I don't know what I'm missing. Yes, helping people, feeding the hungry, doing things for other people is good, but those are usually temporary and not something you occupy your whole day with every day with.
Well, let's say this. So Bob, you may be one of those people who, no matter what you're doing in your life, you're enjoying it. I mean, that may be just how you are. What I will say is that there's other reasons why people don't retire. It's not just because they love what they're doing. It's also because financially they can't afford to. And there's a lot of people who fit into that category. So there's a lot of people who continue working. But I'd say the number one piece of advice I'd give to you, Bob, if you're open to it, is one of the things that's interesting is how could you become a beginner at something again? And maybe you start at that as a hobby, or maybe you imagine, once a month or twice a month going and being almost like an intern doing something else that's not what you normally do. Because the process of learning to become a beginner again is not just, it's very humbling, but it's also, it's beautiful for your brain. It starts to actually allow the synapses in your brain to fire in new ways. And the challenge with doing the same work over and over again, even if you're learning along the way, is at some point you do get into habits that you don't even notice that you have, that actually sort of you get stuck in. So, there's lots of different paths. I would just say retirement is an alternative to retirement is taking a gap year, taking an adult gap year, or an adult gap month even. We have people come to our sabbatical sessions in Baja, and they come and sometimes spend 2 or 3 months, and with the purpose of saying, what's next? And knowing that I want to try something new. I just don't know what it is yet. And we like to call that same seed, different soil. What is it that you become a master at? What do you know well that you could apply somewhere else? Maybe not even in your own industry. So thanks for the question, Bob. Let's see who else has a question. Anybody, any questions in the chat? Okay, we have John. Okay, gals, you're gonna have to catch up with the boys. You know how boys like to talk a lot. Nothing against Bob or John, but the next one's gonna be a woman, because I'm daring you. John, what's your question?
So you just talked about having that beginner's mindset. So you're still at a very young age too. So do you expect you yourself to start another chapter later on in your life?
I don't expect anything. I intend to stay curious, because disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So I don't necessarily want to expect anything, but I intend to stay curious. So let me tell you a little story. So Peter Drucker was a famous management theorist. He really was the person who helped the business world see that management could have a academic and maybe intellectual ballast to help people understand who's successful as a leader. He was fascinating. He wrote 40 books. He wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. But the thing that's fascinating about him is that every 2 years, he would study something new that he knew nothing about, that was unrelated to his career. So he was fascinated by Japanese ikebana, like, the fine art of little Japanese not flower arranging, but like that little plant that you could actually sort of help it grow in its own way. He also was fascinated by medieval war strategies. So long story short is, every 2 years, he would get curious about a topic he knew nothing about. Ever since I learned that about him 12 years ago, that's what I've been doing. I've studied hot springs, and actually New Mexico is not a bad place to learn about hot springs, but I wanted to learn about the rock formations and the geology of what leads to hot springs. I also wanted to learn about festivals. Why do we have festivals in the world? What has been the history of festivals, and what has been their role in society? I wanted to learn about emotions, because when I was going through some really tough emotions, I felt like I was like an emotional imbecile. So I love learning new topics. And I do think that this gets back to the curiosity idea. So for me, I can't tell you, if you'd said to me at age 50, I was going to be working for Airbnb, which is now the most valuable hospitality and travel company in the world by far, crazily. Or if you said, I'm going to be considering myself a modern elder and moving to Mexico to create a campus, and now moving to New Mexico to create a campus, I would have just said, you're nuts. I'm not a modern elder. Like, what are you talking about? So I think learning how to use your curiosity as a compass for where you're supposed to go next is a beautiful way to live life. Because it means that you're not overly planning, and you're having a certain trust. It's sort of like what Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. I would say follow your curiosity. And I think that will serve you well in terms of not just living a good life, but getting yourself into some really fascinating situations. Okay. Yes, John, I love curiosity as a compass too. I've never said that before. Yes, let's keep that one in mind. You heard it here first. Thanks, John. Okay, now going back to the gallery view. Who is it? Who is it? Oh, come on, women. You can do it, Nancy. Nancy, you got your hand up.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm over 70 at this point, a little over 70, and kind of in the process of trying to figure out, how do I shift my purpose from all the work that I've done over the years to something new, that might encompass that work, but that it's not the same of having that schedule of doing the same things over and over again. But I've found, as I've been aging also, that in feeling a bit less effective than I maybe was when I was younger, that I'm having a harder time kind of keeping my confidence in myself, in my abilities, and just wondering what you're learning around that aspect. How do we, sort of hold on to that, self-confidence, and saying, I know I can jump into this and be effective, even though, my abilities seem to be, declining in various ways.
Well, so great question, Nancy, and I appreciate your vulnerability in asking it. Two thoughts. Number one is there are things we get better at with age that relate to our brain, and there are things that we get worse at. We're pretty not, society reminds us of what we get worse at. We have our senior moments, which basically means our memory is not as good. And it's pretty clear. Our recall is not as good, partly because we have a much larger file cabinet in our brain of things to remember. But there's other reasons too. So some of it's the chemistry of the brain. But one of the things we don't hear a lot about is that, as we get older, our ability to synthesize things and think systemically and holistically gets better up until, mid to later 70s. And the average person. So what does that mean? It just means we can actually sort of connect the dots a little bit better. And so, we're not able to recall and we don't remember facts as well. We definitely don't have as good short-term memory, but we're able to sort of see things and be able to maybe trust our intuition a little bit more about the pattern recognition we're seeing. So sometimes it means there's an article that Arthur Brooks wrote, in the Atlantic. It was in June 2019, and it's a terrible title for an article. It says your professional career is ending faster than you think, or something like that. If you just look at Arthur Brooks, the Atlantic, June 2019, you'll see it. And the first 2/3 of the article is sort of depressing. It says here's all the things you get worse at with age. But it also says in the last third of the article, here's what you get better at. And you get better at being a coach or a mentor or actually a professor, even somebody who can actually synthesize things. Being there you go, John, put it right there. Thank you. It's a beautiful article because by the end you sort of realize, okay, now it's a matter of what habitat needs me and what habitat could I work in that actually is better suited for me. The second thing I would just say, there's also a book called for those who are geeks on brain health by Dr. Gene Cohen, the late Dr. Gene Cohen, called The Mature Mind. And it talks about what gets better in your brain with age. But the second piece of it is the more relevant piece for all of us because we're not all brain scientists. It's the following. Helping you move from a fixed to a growth mindset in your life does the following. This is all work by Carol Dweck from Stanford. When you have a fixed mindset, you often have a tendency to try to prove yourself, and you have a fixed capacity of what you believe you can do. And your goal in life is to prove to others and yourself that you can do those things, and you define success as winning. But if you live a fixed mindset towards things, it means that you're always trying to prove yourself, but you're not trying to improve yourself. So a growth mindset means you're trying to improve yourself, and you're not focused on proving, but improving, and not focused on winning, but focused on learning. So the number one thing I would suggest, Nancy, you might consider is, how could you move into a learning mindset such that you said, you know what, I'm going to be a beginner. I'm not going to be very good at that, but there's something, again, the curiosity is what's fueling you. And if it's in a professional environment, that can be uncomfortable. I will tell you, being in my 50s at Airbnb was really hard because I was the dumbest person in the room quite often, especially when it came to anything technology related. But I had to come from the place of saying, I'm going to be open about what I don't know, but curious and desirous to actually get better at it, and not judge myself as much, because it's that self-criticism that actually makes things worse often. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Chip.
Yeah.
Appreciate that wisdom.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to the gallery view and see if there's any other questions. I want another woman. So we'll be two and two if we have another woman ask. I may call on some people. One of you is sleeping right now, I can see. I'm not going to call on you, but
That can't be true.
Dorothy. Oh, you just woke up. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't wake up. I was here.
No, not you, Dorothy. Dorothy, you were awake. So go for it.
Okay. My question is, how do you deal with expectations? There's a certain expectation. Okay, now you're retired travel and service and volunteering. And I'm not sure that's really for me because I've spent my life behind a screen and I enjoy that. And I love doing puzzles at my desk. And I really am very happy that the COVID kept me home. I tried to retire in 2020 and there was no reason to because I could stay home and do the work. So I did another year. But the expectations, my curiosity is not about travel per se or volunteering, although I'm dabbling in it and trying to do it. So how do we deal with that?
Okay, so here's a question for you. Are those expectations your expectations? Are they your spouse's expectations or friends? Or are they some societal expectation?
Probably societal.
Okay.
I think.
Dorothy, you have earned it. You've gotten to the place to say, to hell with you, society. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. Truly. So this is the beautiful piece of, this is actually part of this is one of the biggest reasons that people actually feel happier as they get into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and women into their 80s, is they feel more freedom to just live their life the way they want to. So I am granting you the freedom to do that and to just, follow not just your curiosity, but follow your joy, follow the things that you just enjoy doing. And yeah, if you feel like you're missing out, FOMO, fear of missing out, that is such an adolescent thing. And it's not a bad thing. You can still have it in your 60s, 70s, and 80s if you want. But it's such a stupid thing to have at some point because the fear of missing out just means you're not focusing on what's right in front of you. Thanks for that. I love the question because it's a simple question, but a profound one because a lot of us need to keep reminding ourselves of that. All right, let's see back to the group and see if there's any more questions.
I have a question, Chip.
Yeah.
This is Tammy.
Hello, Tammy.
Hi.
Now the women are ahead. It's 3-2. No, this is not competition. No competition.
And Allison is going next. We have another woman.
I like it.
So my question is, a lot of people go through work. And I've done this many times in my life. There've been many workshops and events and trainings, and you go and you have this great weekend and you see these new ideas. So I'm just wondering for people who are thinking about your online program that starts in October, what can you really expect? Because what little I know about it, because I know just from having worked with you guys recently, and have of course heard a little bit about Paula's experience. But this sounds really different to me, not your normal, like go show up for the weekend and then you're on your own and, trying to figure it out. So how does that kind of work?
Thank you for the question, Tammy. I was on the Esalen Institute Board of Trustees for 10 years, and Big Sur, probably the most famous personal growth retreat center in the US. And I was stunned when I just saw people would leave and then there was nothing, like, where's the support? So there are 3 ways you can become an alumni in MEA. And that's either our workshops in Baja, our sabbatical sessions in Baja, or MEA Online. And our fastest growing segment is the MEA Online. You go through the 8-week workshop, you're in a cohort with a small group of people. At the end of the workshop, you are now an alumni. You get an alumni newsletter every Friday. You're part of a regional chapter. So there's a New Mexico regional chapter that is growing very quickly. We have 25 regional chapters around the world. Our most active one is in Australia. So it's a global movement of modern elders that we're talking about here. But the New Mexico chapter is going to be growing. In fact, I think it's on the 19th, which is this Sunday. We invited all of our New Mexico alums to our Saddleback Ranch here for a dinner. So there's that. There's also something called Corazon, which is our subscription membership program, $50 a month, and you get a bunch of additional ways of interacting and connecting. So there's 1,500 alumni from 28 countries. So it's a beautiful community, and So it is not this sort of cold turkey thing when you leave the workshop, you sort of feel like there's no way to connect anymore. There's lots of ways to connect because that, as I said, purpose, wellness, and community are important. And so that community part of it is essential. And it's part of the reason why ultimately we're creating these regenerative communities where people can actually live in an MEA community. We have one in Baja and we will have one in Santa Fe in the not too distant future here at the ranch. Thank you. I'm going to go to Allison.
I just unmuted. Okay, somebody made a comment about having a sense of urgency to enjoy life. That struck me because I have so much, I feel a sense of urgency and I have so many things that I want to do. I feel like I left a whole career in the corporate world. I have my own business now, very active in the community. And I just feel this sense of, I guess it's urgency. And I think what my question is, or what my issue is what happens when somebody is like, I feel like I was just let out of the gate and I just go, go, go. When you're talking about focusing, what advice do you have for somebody who could really just use like a, tips maybe to focus on what really is most important when I feel like everything is so important?
Well, one of the things we get better at, and it's sort of even an indicator of wisdom, is we accumulate knowledge over a lifetime. But so knowledge is something we add to. Wisdom is something that we distill. It's actually, it's like, learning how to almost edit. And so one of the things that, I would highly recommend is you start to, identify what are all these things you want to do and prioritize, because you can't do them all at the same time. And I will say that, energy is an issue as we get older. And trying to do, I take my own medicine chip on this one. I can only do so much in a day or over the course of a week. And I tend to push myself pretty hard. And I can't do it like I could 10 years ago. So being more discerning about what is most important is priority. We do something at the Modern Elder Academy called the Great Midlife Edit. And it's a way of actually saying, what is no longer serving me? Mindsets, things I do, people in my life, ways of habits and ways of being. When you can start to actually get rid of the things that aren't serving you and focus instead on the things that you're curious about or you really want to put your energy into, you realize that you don't have to be running this midlife marathon with a lot of baggage. And so I would just say that one of the simple things you could do is to say, if I'm going to add something to my plate, I got to take something off, because, as you get older, your plate doesn't get bigger. The other thing I would just say is meditation or any kind of mindfulness practice that allows you to be reflective, to sort of slow down a little bit and to tap into some of that discernment is really valuable as well. It also helps you to be more in the moment, and it's being in the moment. For those who are geeks like me, do a Google search for Laura Carstensen at Stanford, another professor at Stanford. Her work on showing why do people get happier with older has a lot to do with, as you live longer and you have fewer years ahead of you, you actually get focused more on the moment, in the moment, and less on the things that you want to do 5 years from now, 10 years from now, etc. And that going into the moment actually tends to take people into a happier place.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's see. We got Francoise.
Yes. Hello, Chip.
Francoise Chassot.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much. I am interested in community living for the modern elder. And just before with some other person, you were talking about regenerative communities. So I don't know what that is and what you're doing.
Yes.
I'd also like to know resources. How do I go about researching what's available out there?
So let's start by saying that there's a small percentage of the population that is excited about, someday going and living in a retirement community. It's not a large percentage. But there are people who want that. What's interesting about baby boomers and Gen Xers is that very few of them want to live in community like their parents did or do. And so what does that mean? We call it a regenerative community because instead of retiring, people are regenerating themselves. But the core of it is to find land here on the ranch here in Galisteo area. It's a ranch, but in other locations around New Mexico, it might be a farm. And we use regenerative ranching or farming principles to regenerate the soil, which is a beautiful way to address climate change. And it's a great way of, especially if it's farm products, of creating better produce. So one of the pillars of our regenerative communities is to have a farm or ranch where we're regenerating the soil. A second pillar is regenerating the soul. How do we help people feel a sense of regeneration in their own life? And that's really what MEA is all about. The third regenerative principle or pillar is community. And that's the broader community of MEA. How do you feel connected? Or residentially, what would it be like to live in an intentional community where I don't have to worry as I get older about the caregiving piece, because actually the community cares for itself, just like families used to. Well, there are places in the US that are starting to operate that way, intergenerationally as well. And that's what we're intending to do. There was a great article in the New York Times, maybe a week ago, within the last week, about intergenerational housing. Just do New York Times intergenerational housing, and it's a pretty big article on that. And I've written about this in my daily blog, which is called Wisdom Well. So if you do look Wisdom Well, Chip Conley, you can just be a free subscriber to that as well. And then the fourth pillar is locale. How do we, in creating a regenerative community, give back to the location, the people, and the people who live there and the place in a way such that we are a positive influencer in that place. So that's how we define a regenerative community as opposed to a retirement community. You can go onto the MEA website, and there's a tile on the homepage that says regenerative communities, and learn more there. And again, on the Wisdom Well blog, you can just go to the blog, my blog, and just put in regenerative communities, and you'll see all of the results of blog posts that we've written, or I've written mostly, that are about regenerative communities. Thank you. Okay, I think we may be getting close to our final here. I don't see any other hands up. And co-housing, and Margaret said co-housing has been doing this for a long time. Co-housing is a great thing to research as well. Co-housing, yeah, I see Christine, we're going to go to you in just 1 second. Co-housing is something you could research as well. And that is really how do you live in a household where people are supporting each other in that household, especially good for people who are on tighter financial budgets as well. I think this may be the last question. Christine, bring us home. Yes.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this.
I want to see you, Christine.
Oh my God. Okay,
I know you're
in
your bathrobe, and you
I
have.
am. Can you see me?
Yes.
I'm in a baseball hat. I'm going fishing.
Okay, that's good.
So yeah. So my question is, and thank you. This was a great session. I also turned 61, and I am so tired. I don't want to work anymore. I've been in high tech for 38 years.
Wow.
And I'm done, right? But the problem I'm finding is I feel like I only have 10 good years left to do this fishing. And so I bought a little home in Wisconsin, back in my home state. And I'm finding I'm spending so much money building my castle that I can't retire because I got to cut the budget somewhere. So that's my struggle. I'm glad to see all the other folks here that are in their 70s. And I just feel like I only have 10 good years. So,
Well, let's if I could. You may have 10 good years left in your career or in the workplace.
No, my career's done. It's done. I'm done. I'm tired.
No, but you can. Okay. When you say 10 years, you probably have more than 10 good years of health left if you want it. I mean, It depends on how you're taking care of yourself and what you're doing. But, if you've been doing 38 years, was it with the same company? Were you working for Intel this whole time? What were you doing?
No, it was IBM, Oracle, and Semantic, so high
Yeah.
tech.
So you have worked in huge companies and, full time, with all kinds of rules, and you don't have to do anything, but something to consider is what's called a portfolio life. What is a portfolio life? It means that you actually are available to do a little bit of consulting on the side and a little bit of help here or there, whether you're actually making money doing it or not. Sometimes people do it as a volunteer thing. There's an organization called Encore, and the Encore Fellows Program is all about this. Is how do you help people from the organizational, often the for-profit world, help take some of their skills and give it into the nonprofit world. Sometimes you get paid for it, sometimes you don't. So, I would say that you don't have to go cold turkey just because the way you have had to operate in your career has burned you out. So it's just, there's also a great book I would suggest you might want to read. It's called The 100-Year Life. Now, you may not want to live to 100, but that book has a lot of great suggestions for how people can move into a different way of retiring that is not just the cold turkey. I'm no longer working at all. I'm just going to fish all the time. I'm going to golf all the time. I'm going to, watch Netflix all the time. So
Good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for letting us see you. I think we may be done. Let's see. Let's see what I hear from Tammy. I'm losing my voice. That's why I'm saying that.
Oh, I'll unmute. Sorry. I was just wondering, Chip, why do you think it took us so long to disrupt this aging issue? I mean, we've all known it's been coming for years and years, and yet we're just now waiting. And all of a sudden, I mean, it's really exciting, but it just feels like there's so much opportunity for people who are 50 plus.
Demographics are predictable.
Yes.
You do see it coming. But until you're experiencing it yourself, not a lot of people, there's a guy named Ken Dykewald who's a friend, and he became a gerontologist at age 23. Like, how many people in their 20s want to go figure out, how to help people live a better, latter half of their life? Right. So until we get to that era ourselves, and baby boomers are an enormous generation, it's a generation that doesn't necessarily want to do it the way their parents did it, and Gen Xers as well. And what that means is that, there's a growing sense that, if I'm living longer, I don't want to just spend 30 years twiddling my thumbs. So I think the longevity revolution that we've seen in the last 100 years, for those who don't know it, the longevity in the year 1900 was 47. And by the year 2000, it was 77. So it's an enormous change. And that has led us to asking bigger questions, and why that book, The 100-Year Life, is a great book for people who are interested in it. So I think it's just a lot of societal change, as well as the nature of the people who are now retiring are different than their parents. Yeah. We have another question for Barack.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for a great session. I wonder if I could just take 1 minute and make a kind of a shameless plug for all these wonderful people to join us in October, where I'm going to have the privilege of doing a session aimed around healthy aging, of course, what we've been talking about, but also moving towards healthy dying. It's on many people's minds, perhaps more than it needs to be, but how to explore our values and document our preferences and take our power to have some control as we move in that direction. I talk about how do we have the kind of death we seek? And so we're going to talk about those issues, and also talk a little bit about our new law in New Mexico that authorizes medical aid in dying. Again, we'll talk a little bit, and then we'll have a good discussion, and I hope many of you can join us. So thanks for allowing me to get in on your time, Chip.
All right, thank you, Barack. And Trish actually has her hand up, but she's driving, so oh, Trish.
Yeah, hi, Chip. Hi, everyone. Sorry that I've had to be in and out on this call, but I really wanted to take part, and I've loved everything you're saying. It's really inspiring. One thing I was thinking about is with teen years, younger people helping older people learn technology. we see so many, far, far more low income older adults than those who can afford their retirement. And so I guess my question is, one, can you tell me about Modern Elder Academy's hopes, or maybe you're currently already doing the work to address those who can't afford to pay, or who can't afford to pay as much as it costs? And also, just, are you seeing that in a lot of your talks, in your, since it's now international, do you see what I see?
Yeah, two answers there. Thank you, and be safe with your driving. Number one is for the people who've come to our Baja workshop program, over 50% of them have been on some form of scholarship we give them. So if you actually go to the Modern Elder Academy website and you say, I want to go to one of those programs down there, we have scholarships. We have two levels of scholarship that we offer, and over half of our people have been on some form of scholarship. So, having socioeconomic diversity in a cohort of 20 people is really important. Secondly, we have a program called the Activists in Residence program, and that's for our sabbatical sessions program. We've closed out how many seats we have for the Activists in Residence, and you have to apply to it. But not only is it completely free, but we actually fly you to Baja and give you a stipend. And you just have to show that you're an activist, and you get to come for a 2-week stay, everything paid by us. So the idea of making sure this isn't just something that, rich white people can do is really important, because most, and nothing wrong with rich white people, but, the bottom line is most personal growth retreat centers, that's sort of their core audience. 63% of our alumni are women. 25% are people of color, are BIPOC. So we do our best, and I appreciate the question, Trish. That was a great question. Okay, I'm done. I'm done.
Thank you.
My voice
that was awesome.
All right.
Yeah, take care of your voice. And that's a good segue into just thanking you so much for what you guys are doing. It is really exciting. I would encourage everybody to go onto the Modern Elder Academy website, because you can find information on all the topics Chip talked about today, including downloading the anatomy of a transition. So there's a PDF I know that's available on that website that you guys could check out. So Chip, thank you again. It's so great to have you. We really appreciate your time today.
I love the relationship we've been building with you. So NMNEW is, I think it's a future license plate.
Yes, I love that idea. That's a great idea. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, and I also want to thank our sponsors once again. Thanks to them, we're able to offer these kinds of learning events free. And as Barack was mentioning, our next event is going to be on October the 20th. And look forward to hosting him to talk to us about curating our final act. And then we have other events coming up as well. So I would encourage you to visit the New Mexico New website to either join us or find out about other events that are going to be happening. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate your time. And I guess just have a great rest of your week. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Chip. Oh, if you're still on, Bob, the recording, we'll post it on our YouTube channel, and I'll also send out some information via email.